we go. Realization consists of orienting towards actuality. Simply, that and nothing else. It consists of orienting towards what is actually present. And unrealization consists of anything other than that, orienting towards fantasy, imagination, definitions, and holding them to be actual.
Peter, I have a question about time. My most common idea of time is in linear, hours or a year ago, but further investigating it, I know I've asked about this before, and somehow I got the idea you said it didn't exist, but it does exist just as much as matter or space, but how I think it exists is different. I mean, when I think about a child, when I was a kid, time was, infinite in a sense. My mom told me to come in an hour. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. But so. Can it exist without any of our preconceptions? Is it there? Is it something?
There's no it, there's just this.
Yeah, it's part of this, yeah.
Yeah, it's not even a part of this, it's just this. And time is a way that we look at this, and it's an oversimplification.
Is it sort of like a mode? Or?
You can say that, but it's not anything, it's nothing.
It's nothing.
No, it's a way of looking at it. This is itself. It's not nothing, but it's not anything that you can specify. So specifying it as time or as space or as matter or as consciousness or anything like that is too much. You're going into abstraction already. It is what it is, and it can't be said what it is.
But is it a way that this expresses itself?
No, this is its own expression. There's no this and then an expression. This is, if there's an expression, this is its own expression, but there's no expression either. There's not even really a this, it's just a way of indicating actuality.
So
what this is can't be said. Can't be said, can't be thought, can't be analyzed, can't be described, cannot be found, even, cannot be defined, and yet it's actual. All definitions, all findings, all ways of holding it to be are imaginary, they're fantasy. They don't exist as such in the terms in which they are positive, in the terms in which they hold themselves to be.
But they're so fantastic and so infinite in the ways that different.
Yeah, this is fantastic and infinite for sure.
So they're part of. I mean, they are this. Yeah. So time is this.
Yeah, time is this, which completely transcends time.
Right.
It completely transcends space. It completely transcends consciousness. It completely transcends all of these, modes or axes which we typically look at it in terms of. These things we abstract out of it, and but then the mistake is to suppose these abstractions actually exist autonomously, or in some sense, oh, there is time, there is space, there is matter, whereas time is just a bad approximation of what this is. Space is just a very bad approximation of what this is. Matter is a bad approximation of what this is. Consciousness is a bad approximation of what this is. But this is itself, it is not an approximation, it's actual, so you have the actuality here, so you don't need approximation. And again, realization consists of orienting towards actuality, towards what is actually present. Which we do all the time already. We just so we already have our foot in the door of that mode of being with this. Walking is a perfect example. Walking is totally non-conceptual. Walking is not an idea. I can get out of this chair, I can stand on this floor, I can walk around. I can't possibly say how I do it. I can't possibly say what's happening. It's a completely transcendental direct energy engagement. I can wave my hands around, I can talk, I can think. All these things are entire bottomless mysteries. So we already are doing direct engagement with reality, but we get distracted with our abstractions, with our designations and names, and particularly we orient towards definitions of what we are, what's going on here, that are imaginary. And that's what causes unrealization. And it exists in the context of realization, because actuality is realization, and you are actual. So you are already a field of realization that has this seed of unrealization in it. Maybe, I mean, not you are, but one may be. And then, because of orienting towards that seed of fantasy, there's confusion about the rest of it.
So there's no use looking at the different ways that I can experience time.
Right. It's great fun to look at, but look at it as a way of transcending what we're starting point. I mean, in other words, use any way of looking at time, for example, as a starting point, and then move from that into this and let it stop being time and be with actuality. But you'll never get to the bottom of it. You'll never get to the bottom of what time is. You'll never get to the bottom of what memory is. You never get to the bottom of what abstraction is. All of these spontaneous functionings that happen are infinite. They are this. And so the point is to, if you look at these various things, if you sort of mull over these various things, that's fine, but use it as a starting point to depart from that idea and let go of it into whatever you find. And you won't find a whatever. You won't find a thing that has any definition or any boundaries or anything you can say, oh, I found such and such.
So the whole idea, say, it's a sort of Christian or mystic idea of, timelessness, or, Ram Dass, be here now, or in the moment, even that is a concept of time.
Yeah, it's inaccurate. It refers to something. It's a potential jumping off point. I mean, one aspect of actuality is it is present. here now. That begs the question: well, what is here and what is now? Well,
Right.
and if you say, okay, what is here? If you look for what is here while hanging on to here, it's like trying to dive into a pool while hanging onto the diving board. So you find here, you find the actuality of here by starting from here and then seeing what you find, which is this, which is what here refers to, but this is entirely transcends here in every sense. Because if you go look for there, you also find this.
Right. But maybe a closer approximation that is
But the problem is any approximation is wrong. Approximating per se is the problem.
Right.
So trying to get closer approximations is just trying to stir confusion, trying to stir delusion. The whole point is to let go of approximations. You don't need the trick is you don't need approximations. You don't need to get the right answers to the test. You need to crumple the test up, throw it on the floor, and walk away. Get on with your life.
Well, sir, what happens to me though is, I think I do have, I have experiences. I do notice, but then I go back. I try to approximate what it is,
Sure.
but I can't.
Yeah, and that's okay. Trying to approximate it is fine. Just don't orient to that. It's just a game. It's like a parlor game. It's like writing fiction.
Right.
It's a fun way to pass the time, but you don't actually get anything that is worth anything. You don't get reality.
No.
So approximating is great fun. You can sit and have great philosophical debates with people, and just you just have a great time. Kill an evening, drink a bottle of wine, but you won't get anywhere worth getting, because the only thing worth getting is beyond approximation, entirely beyond approximation.
No, I've had experience like that. I say, oh, okay, now I experienced this, and then I try to go get that same experience. Forget it.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. And it's really, in a profound sense, realize, the art of really moving into realization is the art of letting go. And it is an art, because again, it's so easy to sort of get this, this is amazing, I get it, and then go to approximating again. It's really, really easy to do that. But to go the wow, I get it, and just let go, drown, is a kind of an art form.
Right. But couldn't it be sort of another interesting thing, or thing to do is to examine the approximations?
Oh yeah, sure. It could be great
in terms of
fun.
questioning them, so that they just
all that is good. But again, it's like if you're interested in swimming, studying diving boards ain't going to do it. You got to get in the water sooner or later, or it's not swimming. You can be an expert on designing swimming pools and designing diving boards and the theories of what material makes the best diving board and all this stuff, but it has nothing to do with swimming.
Right.
So it's apples and oranges. It's just a different thing, And realization is found outside of approximation. It doesn't exclude approximation, because of course approximation exists in the context of actuality. Approximation is the process of approximating. Is actuality, but it isn't actually approximating.
Right.
In other words, everything that happens is actuality, but it isn't actually what you think it is. And as long as you're being with it in terms of thinking it's anything one way or the other, that's exactly what pushes you away from actuality into confusion.
Peter, at the beginning you said realization is orienting towards something.
Oh yeah, orienting to actuality, to what is actually present.
To me, that implies a process.
Well, it's a condition. I wouldn't say a process. Orient not in the sense of something you do, orient in the sense of a condition that is the case. Like you're oriented towards the center of the earth by sitting on the seat. It's not, you don't need to do it, you just orient. I mean, it's any examination of ways of putting this are always going to reveal inadequacies because the ways of putting it, language is intrinsically approximating. But in point of fact, there is, I think one of the clearest ways I can put it is orientation. Because delusion consists of you can call it defining. If you define what is happening, if you define your existence or your circumstances or your being or anything in terms of definitions, then that's delusion. If you define your being in terms of actuality, which is undefinable, so we're using the word define in sort of two senses here. That's why the word orientation is a little less.
It's really, whenever you get a verb, you're in problems.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Not to mention those pesky nouns.
Pesky nouns can all describe the same thing.
Yeah. Well, verbs do too.
Yeah, but verbs imply action.
Yeah, they do imply action, which is a slippery slope.
Which is, okay.
So,
But again, any time we look at ways of putting this, you always come up against inadequacy, intrinsically. No way. Because there's no way to put this accurately, because again, this is entirely beyond conceptualization, and words by definition are concepts. In one sense, in another sense they aren't. And so we can do magic with them.
To quote the master, can't be said.
Can't be said.
So if we're not defining, then are we experiencing actuality?
You're always experiencing actuality. There's nothing else to
Are
experience.
we aware of that?
You're always aware of it.
So it's not something other than we already know.
Right. It's just what it's just what that actually is, as opposed to being what you may be thinking it is. And it never is what you think it is, but you may not recognize that fact. In other words, what you think it is, it never is that. And you are always experiencing what it actually is. But if you're thinking that it is what you think it is, then you're even though you're experiencing actuality, you're not oriented towards it. Your feeling tone of what's going on here is a narration, as opposed to what's going on here. The answer is the answer is the thing itself. As soon as there's an abstraction, what's going on here? Well, we're at Belvedere, we're sitting in the house, and we're having. It's like, no, wrong. Totally inadequate, totally non-inclusive. It's not that those descriptions aren't the case as far as they go, but they don't go anywhere. They don't go nearly far enough.
So
They don't even scratch the surface.
is it also not a matter of us not being aware of the descriptions that we're applying? Being awareness is using descriptions is fine. It's a matter of orienting towards them. It's not using descriptions or having them or having describing and abstracting going on in your mind and in your consciousness. The problem is if you orient towards that or not. In other words, carrying around maps in your car is not a problem. And even looking at them and studying them is not a problem. But if you think the maps are the place, that's a problem.
So, Peter, I was really taken by this Jean-Paul Gaultier exhibit. I noticed after seeing it, I really wanted to replay the images and all of that in my mind.
So
So that's basically a fun parlor game, right?
Sure.
But the experiencing of that in the moment would be, you know, I am in the moment. I've got these going into the texture. How do you understand my question?
I think so. When you think about something, let's say, no matter how detailed or artfully, that is an event, and it's a valuable event because it's an actual event. All events are valuable because they're all actual, and actuality is supremely valuable. So thinking about something, or reminiscing about something, or recreating an experience you really liked and enjoying that recreation is all great. But the exhibit was not an exhibit. The recreation is not a recreation. It's all just this amazing, you can't say what, and wow. And isn't it fun? But have at it, yeah, by all means, have fun with any possible mode that you can go into experience. Enjoy the hell out of it, because why not? You know, but nothing is what you think it is. So if you're thinking, oh, there was this exhibit, and you're thinking, oh, you know, let me sort of revisit it in my mind and find what I found valuable and all that. And even the thinking of that is fine, but don't think that it actually is true. It's just a way. It's just a way of your mind addressing this astoundingness. You know.
So then, if one moves to texture in the moment or whatever, then that's the experience.
Of course.
That's
what is present. Literally, what is present. Substantially, what is present. And this word "substantial" is a little, you know, inadequate, but it captures it. You know, and if there's experience present, something is present, and that's it. Period. End of story. You know, whether it's you know, oh, I'm remembering something. But if it's an actual experience, it is present. It is an actuality, and that's it. And it's here. And that's the finish line. That's the juice. And then how you qualify it and this and that and the other is just, who cares? It's not it. It's it. It's the presence of it. It's it. And it's this qualification going on. That qualification, as you're calling it, is present, is an actuality. Is there's something there, and that's it too. But it's not about anything. It doesn't refer to anything else. There's no referentiality. There's astounding. What's a good word to put this? I can't think of a simple word. I'm sure there is one, but the way in a fractal, every portion is an embodiment of every other portion, and they're cross-related in astounding nonlinear ways. And this is like that. So there's an astounding interrelationship of this with itself. But it's not referential. Referential is too simple a way to see it. It's more that everything that happens is an embodiment of the same thing. So of course it's all interrelated. Let's call it. But it's not like there's a this and it refers to a that. Like, oh, that was an event, and now this is a memory of that, and this memory is of the event. That's too heavy-handed. The event is entirely transcendental embodiment of everything, and the memory is an entirely transcendental embodiment of everything. And since it's an embodiment of everything, they can of course have an enormous amount to do with each other, but there's no each other that they have anything to do with. It's kind of I'm not putting this very clearly. I don't think.
Holographic.
Yeah. So there's meaningfulness. There's meaningfulness that permeates to an inconceivable, astounding degree in all manifestation. It's not meaningless. On the contrary, it's astoundingly meaningful. But there's nothing that refers to something else.
Sometimes when you use the word orienting, it sounds like you're saying belief. Like if you orient towards an idea about something being a fact in a way, then you're believing the content. Whereas when you're orienting to what is, it's not that there isn't belief, because if there is belief, you see what belief is, and it's not and it's not owned
Yeah.
and what it's experienced.
Yeah, it's a good
As
point.
a belief.
Yeah, it's a good point. There is a profound, there's a way in which orienting and belief refer to similar things. And I don't know that I could say the way in which they're different. But orienting towards actuality is not believing anything about anything. On the contrary, it's letting go of all belief because there's nothing to believe in. In a way, actuality, since actuality cannot be summed up as anything, you can't believe in it because there's nothing there to believe in. There's no target. There's no place to hook into. There's no Velcro to stick on. It's like trying to stick a post-it on the sky. It's just not going to. There's no place to put it. So you can't believe anything about actuality. If you're believing something about what you think is actuality, you're actually believing something about an idea about actuality. You're claiming, because ideas are believable. You can believe in or disbelieve an idea. You can't believe in or disbelieve in actuality. There's nothing there to. There's no target.
And that's the difference in the use of the word orienting.
Yeah.
Because I think that
Although essentially it's the same thing.
no, well, that's what I was going to
But
say.
in
When you
fact,
use
it's
the word
different.
Orienting as orienting to a particular idea, a notion. It's almost, instead of orienting, to me, it seems more like it's your being distracted by it. You're orienting in the sense that it's caught your attention and it's become something real, not as an experience, but as its content, instead of just being an experience. I don't care whether I believe in gravity or God or what else. I can believe anything I want because it's an experience, a belief, rather than representing any reality.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems to be like that, cutting out the idea that there is anything to get to, or even anything to think about, or any objectification whatsoever is really of no use.
Yeah, because actuality is already as objectified as it can get, and yet it's not particularly objectified or subjectified or anything. It's none of the above. So it transcends all categories. I mean, it's just, again, any qualification is an oversimplification. That's a good way to put it. So whether something is objective or subjective or objectified or something like that, it's a qualification there. This actuality is actuality. It's not qualifiable. It's not actual because you're qualifying as actuality. It's actual because there's nothing else, and it happens to actually be actual. It's not nothing.
I wonder if you're talking about, I mean, to me, when I hear it, the orienting to me sounds more like a way of being than like intentionally orienting, but seeing it at the same time as it is. So it's like...
It's subtle because we already are actual, so in a certain, to call it a way of being is a little, I don't know how useful that is, because we already are. You can't not be actual. There's nothing else you can be. But if you don't recognize that fact, if you're recognizing some other facts that you're holding as you're misinterpreting the actuality in terms of a way you're holding it to be, and you're recognizing that as actuality, which is made of actuality, is being done by actuality, but is not actuality in its own terms, because actuality doesn't have any terms.
Well, I mean, for me, the word being is like there's nothing to be done about it. It's
Sure.
Which is like what actuality is. There's nothing to be done about it.
Right, exactly.
So that's kind of the way I get those words. I
mean, anytime that you're dealing with words, there's all these issues come up, and it's just inherent. There's no way around it. But fortunately, actuality doesn't give a shit. And words, no words, it's like, cool. Here we are. Except there's no here, no we, and R is a big question mark.
Peter, I've been playing around this week with the idea of experiencing, just thinking about experiencing, and then I pointed out to me, I can take that one step further, just say appearing, which kind of strips off something when you say appearing. Because that's really all the thing is just appearing. It's totally dynamic. So everything, you can't even, there is not, the even is collapses into it. It's appearing is.
Yeah, sure.
Appearing.
Yeah.
So it sort of captures it in a way for me.
Sure, appearing is good, and then move back another step until it's not even appearing.
Yeah.
But that's great. Yeah, move back from experience into appearing is good.
Yeah.
But then hang out for a while and then move on. Don't set up housekeeping.
I'm going to dissolve.
Well, yeah, you do, but this doesn't go anywhere. It's not anywhere though, so that's not an issue. Probably a better way to put it is to let go of orienting altogether. Rather than orienting towards actuality, you're orienting towards interpretations. You undercut you can even continue orienting towards interpretations, but you undercut orientation. Orienting itself exists in a context that is disoriented, and so you undercut it. You basically go to, you might say, a deeper or less defined strata within which the defining happens, without needing to stop it or shut it off or even not participate in it.
So like that ship where you see the candlesticks in the face. It's kind of that subtle layer in there where it changes.
Yeah, it does change. Yeah. I mean, realization is very obvious experientially, let's say. But it doesn't consist of anything other than the way you've always been. But it's that being what it actually is which undercuts what you've always thought it was, without necessarily stopping what you've always thought it was. I don't know that added any clarity.
That's good.
It's pretty good though.
That's the world.
It sounded good.
Yeah. Well, it's probably better just yeah.
Wonderful.
It's so interesting is I almost sort of discounted it. I mean,
Yeah.
sort of always known, you
Yeah.
know, and now I know I've always, but
Yeah.
there was discounted it.
Yeah, we don't know, this normalcy, this just isness that seems like nothing, it's like you walk into a situation like, okay, what's going on here? What's happening? It's like, no, just the walking in is the whole story.
Right.
But what's happening is just bullshit, it's just just getting that.
With all those seekers who knew, I mean, who were seeking for the nothingness, just knew, you know.
Yeah.
Well, although it's not nothing. I mean, it is something.
Yeah, it's
Easy to discount.
It is very easy to discount. In alchemy, they have a very nice reference to this fact. They say that to proceed with the alchemical process, because the great mystery in alchemy is what's the first matter, what do you start with, what's the starting point for the alchemical process. And the teaching that showed up in many alchemical teachings is you take that which is of no value, that's everywhere,
Yeah.
and that's what you start with, and that is that's how you make the philosopher's stone.
A riddle.
That which no one appreciates. Take what no one appreciates, which is everywhere, which people completely devalue, and that's the starting point for the alchemical process, and that's what becomes the philosopher's stone, which refers to exactly the same condition. This very strange fact that this absolute normalcy that we've always known, it turns out to be it. It turns out to be what all the fuss is about. And even we ourselves don't recognize it and don't know it, even though we are it and are immersed in it forever. I mean, it's just so completely obvious.
It's like the stone that the builders passed up.
That's another one, another reference to another sort of thing.
Cool.
Everyone's interested in content. So they throw away all the waste that they throw away. It turns out to be.
Do you think you can live under the kind of fantasies that are constructed around us and still knowing that, like, this is this and that's it?
You mean in terms of other people or something?
I guess so. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. There's this kind of situation of the world around you that there's this thing that's this way and this other thing that's this other way, and I wear a watch because that's a thing, I guess. That's what they say anyway. And seems like you can live within these weird fantasy constructs that come about.
Uh-huh.
If it pleases you, as long as you know that that's not
Yeah.
really a thing.
Exactly so. Yeah, it's not a problem. All human misunderstanding is not actually a problem because it isn't what it thinks it is. It isn't what it pretends to be. It's not actually human misunderstanding. All human functioning is not actually about humans at all, and all human misunderstanding is not actually misunderstanding. It's transcendental energy of it. It's this. And so people wandering around in delusion and spouting constant non-stop insanity is like birds singing in the trees and like light streaming from the sun. It's just an energy manifestation that is intrinsically not at all what people think it is, even as they're busy doing it and thinking it is something. So it's fun. Realization does not demand anything from your environment or even from your personality. It undercuts all that. It's just a reorientation, you could say, or a disorientation, just to letting go of orienting to all that without them needing to deny it or stop it or change it. And you discover when you let go of orientation that what you find, so to speak, what this is, the non-oriented actuality, is already totally engaged with all of that, is doing all that, is all that. And so you end up sort of being de facto oriented to everything without any orientation, because that's actually the condition. Just like all the waves are already oriented to the ocean doesn't need to orient to them. Without effortlessly and without orientation, it's just already one system. And so all this human confusion and delusion and orienting and misunderstanding is actually just ripples of actuality. There's no conflict there at all. There's no antagonism. The fact that humans are crazy and bent on a path of destroying life on Earth and all that is like, cool. Reality doesn't care. It's like, okay, that's how it is, Back to the drawing board. Maybe cockroaches will do it better. Or not.
There's a sci-fi beginning.
It's just really the real question is what's really happening here. It's that simple, and the answer to that is this, and it's already obviously the case, always has been, and what could be simpler? And the fact that it's not what we or people think it is shouldn't come as no big surprise. We've always known we didn't know, right? I mean, you always know that. You know you don't really have you always know you're just giving things your best guess. There's no real surprise there.
I'd be boring if I figured it all out then. I keep myself hidden from myself. It's much more fun.
Well, you can figure it out.
Oh.
Realization doesn't demand figuring it out and doesn't preclude trying to figure it out. You can spend the rest of your life trying to figure it out and still rest in realization. It's the way of passing the time. I think you won't be under the delusion that you're gaining anything. I mean, that's a really good way to capture the feeling of realization. Is it's complete. This is the finish line. There's nothing to be gained. There's nothing missing. There's no missing parts. There's nothing that needs to be developed or brought to completion, or missing parts that would need to be added to make it. Then it'll be just right. It's like, no, this is already entirely complete, and it operates from completeness within completeness. And what is achieved by its operation is, of course, more completeness. But it's not a gain of completeness, because completeness was its starting point. Completeness is its medium, completeness is its mode, and completeness is its result. So in any action, there's no sense of anything being gained. At most it might be analogized to like stirring a pot or something. But there's nothing to be achieved. The achievement has already happened. This is it. This has achieved itself. Or maybe that would be slightly less inaccurate to say this is the achievement of itself. great paper cups.
Well, this thing clear about not having anything to get to, or sort of doing everything backwards to how we have been oriented to doing things, in a sense. So it's sort of like realizing that, asking the question, but knowing that there isn't any answer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just an interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, you can never close anything up. Open-endedness is your starting point.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever process you affect, your result's going to be open-endedness. So you don't actually, there's no development. You don't gain anything or achieve anything or lose anything or move from one condition to another condition intrinsically. Although it always looks different in itself. So there's arguably or apparently all sorts of change and development and all this sorts of thing, but nothing is actually ever developed because the basic condition is already achieved, and it does not become any more than itself, or for that matter, less than itself. And we all know this experientially. If you feel the fullness of your being right now, or the fullness of your experience right now, it's the same fullness of your experience you felt when you were 2. Is there any more fullness? I mean, you have all this life experience. Where is it in terms of just the fullness or solidity or comprehensiveness of your being? Nothing's happened.
That's why I like what Baba says, immediate presence.
Yeah.
Naked, immediate presence.
Yeah, exactly. Just that. Yeah, I call it, I like to call it radiant presence, because it just presence, and the radiance just emphasizes that it presents us all these qualities. You could call it prolific presence or something too. Probably means implies the same thing. But it never becomes more or less present. Presence is never gained and never lost.
You couldn't talk about radiance if there wasn't presence anyway. So it's like
Sure. presence is a wonderful notion because it's so completely obvious and so completely undefinable. You know, it's just completely obvious that is there presence? Well, duh. You know. And yet, well, what is this? What is presence? And all of a sudden, it very clearly illustrates the transcendental nature of this. That transcendental nature, transcendentality is not the opposite of obviousness. On the contrary, they're one and the same. And this is the fact with this condition. Everything is completely obvious, but you can't find any of it. You can't define it. You can't pin it down. So all of this is just completely, your experience is right here. It's completely obvious. It's like it's everything. Every single thing. And yet you go try and find out what any of it is in any sense, and that's obvious. And yet it still is obvious. And the mind. The logical mind might want to try and turn this unfindability and this obviousness as mutually exclusive, but they're one and the same. Actuality is transcendence. Obviousness is complete unfindability. Which just happens to be how it is.
So I was trying to figure out what addiction was. It was or wanting. Obviously, it's thinking that there's something more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But
it's probably oriented around something like that.
But
it's probably oriented around something like that.
Yeah. It's just they've sort of made a slight. It's almost like they're seeking. They're trying to be realized people.
Yeah.
They just made a slight little.
Yeah. All human individual motivation is essentially seeking.
Yeah.
All of it. It's the same. It's couched in different terms, and the apparent target and modes, modes of approach seem to be different. It can be physical or sensory consumption, or behaviors, or all these or various things, or trying to get some sort of realization or understanding, but it's all basically, a confused misunderstanding, orienting towards partiality and need and lack. That's trying to an itch that's trying to be scratched, and you're trying to fill a gap or fulfill a void or achieve a finality that you are defining yourself as not having. And of course, that's all a big misunderstanding. So the way you get that is not by achieving it, but by discovering that it's not, that your starting point is in error.
Yeah.
What you think is the case that motivates all that is not actually like that, and that's what solves the problem.
You can think about it all kinds of different ways. Pursuit of wealth, greed.
Anything, yeah. Basically all human motivation.
Yeah.
Look in the news. Politics and money and success and fame and power and manipulation and inflicting pain. Just all these weird, twisted human perversions are all basically the same thing. In terms of their feeling time, in terms of their actuality, they're just radiant presence.
They're just what?
Radiant presence.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Yeah. That's what's so odd about it.
It is very odd. Odd is a word which fits right in with actuality.
How can we be
no
so
conflict
stupid?
there at all.
How can we be so stupid?
Yeah. I generally go right to astounding. It's way past odd.
Yeah.
Should we take a little break?
We just checked the tires and they're okay.
Oh, sure.
All the cars are okay.
So we'll be back in 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, we have another hour and 40.
So we were talking in the break about the faith and certainty, Peter, you know, in terms of being in the present experience. How does one move from faith to certainty?
Seeing. Faith is orienting towards something that you're holding to be a possibility or a potentiality, whereas certainty is just simply self-evidently what's the case. And so the way to work with this is to see it. And when you see it, it shows what it is, and when you see what it is, then that seeing is itself certainty, because it's self-verifying, it's showing what it is. So when you see that this is intrinsically complete, intrinsically unlimited, so on and so forth, then that is clearly and certainly the case. Yeah. And that is completely actual, real, genuine, and continually, eternally established. So that's just the condition, and that there's nothing to have faith in or not faith. That's just how it is.
So I was sort of seeing that in the moment, that having that experience, but then having to reestablish that in the next moment. Mm-hmm. You know, in terms of the faith thing, mm-hmm. You know, the sense that there is a cumulative experience that can, you know, finally, weigh more on that side of certainty than the other side.
But it's not cumulative faith. It's a developmental skill in seeing. You get to the point where it's easier and easier, and more effortless, and more continual to be seeing, and eventually you're continually seeing it, and then you never depart from seeing it. And if you depart from seeing, the antidote is, of course, to see. And you don't need to have faith in anything, just simply
go to, well,
Yeah.
you know, just look around. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, this is.
Yeah, yeah.
This
No,
is
it's a
it.
continuity of experientiality rather than, you know, conceptuality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't actually. It's impossible to have faith in actuality because you can't find anything to have faith in.
Yeah.
You can't. It's not isolatable. There's no handles or handholds or
Faith is
locus.
probably a poor choice of words, but it does approximate the theoretical understanding of.
Yeah. Well, that there's a there. You can have faith in that, but the there that is here or there is found simply by looking. So then you undercut the loop of having to think about it or have faith in it or remember it or anything like that. It's a simple, self-evident fact,
Yeah, it's like putting
which is
your foot in
immediate
the
and
water.
obvious. Yeah.
seems to have many implications from where this is seen, from where actuality is seen from.
Mm-hmm.
Because it would apply to the seer as well, or the seeing.
Yeah.
There's no interpretation as to what, who or what is seeing.
Yeah.
And we're left with just the actuality of what seems to appear.
Yeah. Yeah. It's endless implications because the implications don't resolve as this or that, so it's just a field of implication that has no target or no result or no direction. It's just, you know, and it's like it's a question mark. You know, it's just, yeah. This. We're used to thinking that seeing involves a seer, or it involves a point of view, or involves various things. But this, you know, like Peter was saying, you know, it's, if you go from taking it as experience, which sort of implies all that, to just appearance, and there's just appearance in it, and there's no, you know, the apparent seer appears, the apparent seen appears, the whole apparent event appears, and the whole thing just is, with, you know, no directionality or localization, or, you know, no parts, or no this doing, you know, no nouns and verbs, no subjects and objects, just presence. It's just presence is present, and there's no thing it's present to, or, you know, there's no parts, there's no transactions, there's no multiplicity. It's just present. And, you know, you look at it in those terms, and yeah, that's pretty much how it is. But you can't even pin that down. Can't pin down anything about it. Because again, you go to it to try to find what it is, and it just, you know, it's a trackless waste. It doesn't. There's nothing. You can't find anything. No reference points. No navigation within it, or any navigation, but you can't tell whether you're going anywhere or not. You never get anywhere.
Yeah, it's appearance appearing, but then take out the appearance appearing, and even trying to understand is another more appearing.
Yeah.
It just keeps coming out of itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there a way to turn the sound on so people online say there's no sound?
The sound is on, the sound is up. According to our broadcaster, the sound is fairly high. I can turn it up a little bit.
Well, they might have to refresh.
Yeah, I don't know. On our end, the sound looks very good. On our end, the sound is maximum.
I have to restart.
They probably can't hear the question. They can hear you.
No, this thing actually picks up all the sound.
The cup is kind of blocked.
No, that's why I use this thing, because it hears
Helen
everything.
says sounds good on her end. So.
Yeah.
Very crisp. And it has that ability to go forward, background, forward.
Yeah, because it's got a very strong compressor in it. Yeah, that's why I always use this little thing, because it really pops up the sound. The sound looks very good. Well, there you go. It got from here to there via Pluto.
And from that end. But that's it. You know, if you just look for any of these, you know, imputations, like, you know, a seer or a scene, or virtually any aspect of where you might be holding experience to be happening, and you just look and you notice that it just doesn't really seem to resolve that way. It's not that it's not that way. It's not that it's conclusively not that way, or not any particular way. It's just that you can't, you know, just in the looking, it opens up, and you can't, it doesn't settle on anything, you know, it's just, you can't, you lose the ability to determine anything whatsoever. And yet this is as it is, completely, effortlessly, spontaneously. But, you know, this is what I started talking about, orienting towards
towards interpretations. We're used to interpreting what's going on here and how does it happen. Oh, there's a seer, and there's a scene, and there's an observing, and there's experience, and there's a world, and there's, however we're used to structuring that. But if you look at any and all of that structure, any of the elements of that structure in terms of actuality, it doesn't resolve as simply as it seems to, according to the way we're used to thinking about it. And you discover the actuality is it's not that it's vague; it's that it's unresolvable. You can't pin it down. You can't get to the bottom of anything. Everything is intrinsically open-ended, and you can't get down to that. You can't even find open-endedness. Itself. It's just you just come up against it. You can't say what it is or how it works. It's just self-evidently the case. And you come full circle at that point, because that's where we started. When you're born, here you are. It's like, wow, just what, and then we build up all of these skills of analyzing it and describing it and holding it to be this or that. And I know this works like that, and this works like that, and we get all this incredible repertoire of description and describability. But it was all erected on our starting point was complete unknowing, but actuality, and we never actually left that. All the description has just been bootstrapped out of itself. It's all just been assertion. And so it's, in a way, it's a lot like, I take that to be analogous to the supposed quote from Christ, unless you become like a little child, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven. I think that's what that refers to. So realization is where we started from, and we never left it. We just erected a huge castle of bullshit on top of it.
All you have to do is look at a little child's eye. You just sort of see the radiance there.
Of course.
Filled with joy.
Yeah, sure.
Well, where did those constructs come from? Weren't they just always there anyway?
Sure, maybe. Who knows?
We just sort of snatched them out.
You can't get to the bottom of that either.
Right.
You could say historically that we're kind of, you could say simultaneously we kind of have an inclination to go to that kind of stuff. A and B, we're also sort of enculturated by the way we're trained by our parents to learn language and to behave in certain ways in society and so on. And the inherent structure of the semantic system, we're taught the language system, and all this sort of brainwashes us into all this structurality, very structural ways of approaching our experience. And you can say that, but even that, you look at what any of that is, and that doesn't resolve as anything. You can't actually get to the bottom of what it actually is or how it works. All you can really say is that this can effortlessly accommodate that degree of, virtual structurality without succumbing to it.
Right. Well, there's all kinds of myths like the tree of knowledge. In the
Sure.
Genesis.
Well, that whole myth, the myth of being cast out of the garden is exactly about this principle.
Yeah.
If you eat of the tree of life, which is just vitality, actuality, there's no problem, and you get to stay in paradise. But when you eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, i.e. discrimination, saying this is that, and this is different than that, and that's different than this, when you begin to approach your experience instead of just as a wholeness or fullness, but as a designation and a differentiation, bang, out of the garden.
Well, like what you just said, that we can do that, and you can sort of see yourself doing it, but it really does not affect, this, at all.
Yeah, it happens in the context of this.
Yeah.
But you have to see this. You have to see this and know it. And then, because it's like a lobster trap, it goes one way but not the other.
Oh, yeah.
You know how lobster traps work? They work the same. It's just basically a big funnel, and the lobsters. It's big enough for the lobsters to get through, but it looks easy on one way, and they're too stupid to figure out how to get through the other way.
Yellow jacket traps.
Yeah.
Yeah. Spiky car
So-
wash things.
The spiky car wash.
Yeah.
So from the point of view of reality, you can look at fantasy and not be entrapped in it. From the point of view of fantasy, you can't even see reality.
Yeah.
Didn't know it was there.
It's not as bad as 3, don't worry.
In a way, though, it's very, very subtle until it's pointed out.
Yes.
It's more about acknowledging that you're always seeing reality.
Yes.
We like to convince ourselves that we have to understand reality, that we have to put words to it, or we deny that we're seeing it, and we've convinced ourselves, or it has convinced itself, so to speak, for the joy of being in Disneyland.
Sure.
Really.
Whatever, yeah.
Because it's all about acknowledging it.
Yeah.
Because what else is there to see?
That's right.
It's that simple.
Yeah. If you're seeing anything, you're seeing reality, because what would unreality be made of? How could you see it? What substance would it be made of?
So, how about belief?
How about it?
If you don't have personal experience, understanding and realization of this present moment, you're working in belief that such a thing exists.
Possibly.
If you're a seeker of some sort or other.
Yeah. And what you're believing in is not this itself, of course.
What you're believing in is something else.
Yeah.
So,
But it's real.
so how can you get that belief to lead you to?
You can't. But you can notice that experience transcends analysis. And then you've got your foot outside the door. As long as you think that experience is analyzable, you're screwed.
Yeah.
In other words, as long as you think your ideas about things could possibly be accurate, you're screwed, because then you're on that never-ending rat race to try and find more accurate ideas. When you get that ideas cannot be accurate, A, and B, that experience transcends ideas intrinsically, then you've got your foot in the door of the mechanism to go into to reorienting or disorienting.
Well, there's something else that goes along with that, right? That you don't have the same experience twice.
Yeah, what's an aspect of it of experience that has this? I mean, that's one of the arguable properties of experience is its intense dynamism and lack of stasis. Reality can be said to have a lot of properties intrinsically, each of which transcends these descriptions, but reality is absolutely dynamic, absolutely unstable, unstatic. It's unfindable or undefinable intrinsically. It's completely present. It's completely here and now. It's only here and now. But you can't find any of these terms, and yet as far as they go, they apply.
As far as it goes, they're operative.
But you can use these as yogic techniques to be with this. You know, if you get that, you know, there's nothing but now, then yesterday is now, and so you look at yesterday. What's yesterday? Yesterday is my idea, is my memory, and that memory occurs now. And so right away you're engaging with your engagement with what you think of as yesterday more in the lines of how it actually is, which is as a present energetic presence, rather than as some extension across some dimension of time and all that, you know, bottomless crevasse of confusion and so on and so forth. You can look at the absolute instability and the absolute uniqueness of experience, non-repeatability of experience, and that undermines right away your ideas of permanence, your ideas of objectivity, objectivity, your ideas of an inert objective world, and all these things instantly, you know, destructed, and so on and so forth. So these are powerful notions, even if they are not absolute. And unfindability is another really powerful notion. You can look and see that you can't, even though everything is apparent and obvious, you can't actually find what anything is whatsoever with any finality, and you can't even find what that unfindability itself is. You know, but again, this is
Can't find what you can't find.
yeah.
What it is.
It's like you're all sitting around talking about
This is hopeless.
It is hopeless. It's absolutely hopeless. It's certain.
Right.
Hope intrinsically involves uncertainty. This is certain. It's really beyond hope.
It's a start.
So when you say see, essentially you mean tune into this.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and again, you can't say what that is or how that works. I mean, I use this word notice a lot.
That sense of tuning in, kind of, is that?
Sure, just notice actuality, notice what is actual, which is what we may be used to calling experience or presence or whatever. And as you notice this actuality, as you tune into it, as you see it, then it becomes quite apparent that you can't, all these qualities become quite apparent, even if undefinable. You get that, wow, I'm seeing it, but I can't say what that is. What is the seeing? And I can't say what the it is that I'm seeing. And also, so the very sort of mechanism, the bridge you use to get to it, self-destructs, or let's say dissipates into ungraspability. You know, the bridge burns itself. You don't need to burn your bridges. And yet it's doable. The fact that you can't say how you do it or what it is you're doing or that you're involved or anything about it is irrelevant. It's still doable. You know, this is why I like to couch this as a yoga, because it's practical. It's nothing but practical. You can't make any sense of it. You can't make heads or tails of it, but it's actually doable.
Well, I think I have that sense of doability. I think I do it. And there's a lot of nattering going on around the edges.
Sure, yeah.
So that's just nattering.
Well, yeah, that's in, you can look at it and see what it is, and when you look at it, you won't see what it is, and then it will dissipate as being anything in particular, and will resolve, or let's say unresolve, into this presence. But this is, part and parcel of this, of the path of this yoga, is that you do it poorly and partially at first. You sort of stumble onto it, and you get little snippets of wow, and then you're back in your usual cloud of confusion. But those snippets get bigger and bigger and longer and deeper and so on and so forth, and the confusion gets less and less, and eventually the confusion dissipates as being anything separate from this seemingly over a period of time, or as a process.
Well, there's a sense of not caring so much about it.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean by this?
Well, that comes with it, yeah.
About caring about the.
There comes a sense of seeing that it's unimportant whether or not it's there at all. There's a sense of seeing that it is intrinsically a spontaneous energetic process that has no implications. So it becomes less important, not just because it becomes less important psychologically, but you begin to see that it intrinsically actually has no importance because it has no repercussions, basically. It's just like an eddy, a ripple in the waters that goes out and isn't doing anything and is not about anything. It has no, it's just an event that has virtually no import.
It's noise, though.
Yeah, it's noise. It's noise in the system that does not in any way detract from or impact the system.
But what I'm saying is that its noise is that it does have something to do.
Right. Well, it claims to be too. And when you're in delusion, you think that this chaos and confusion is a problem and needs to be solved. As you get more and more skilled at being with this and seeing this perspective, it becomes quite clear that this is not this chaotic aspect or noise in the system or friction or whatever you want to call it is actually not an issue at all. It's just an aspect of the way this appears to be. And it is being done by reality, exists within reality, and in no way is problematic to anyone or anything. And that becomes clearer and clearer as this, so-called process progresses. As your perspective becomes more and more the perspective of this actuality, and less of your defined and narrated frame of reference.
Does it actually become clearer and clearer?
It becomes clearer not by being solved. It becomes clearer that is the case. That it doesn't. It becomes clearer what it actually is.
Yeah.
Not that it becomes clarified in the sense of what you think needs to happen when you think it matters. In other words, problems become solved not by their being solved, but by discovering they're not actually problems. They would be misinterpreted as being problems. They're just energy conditions of this astounding, transcendent energy condition.
Even if we think we're not okay, we're probably
Yeah. The problem in thinking you're not okay is the thought.
Yeah.
It's a lot like we have nothing to fear but fear itself. Because we're defining certain conditions as a problem, and if we understood what those conditions were, we would see quite clearly they are not actually a problem, they're just conditions. Yeah. It's like if it's a cloudy day, you think, oh God, what a problem, I wish it was sunny. It's like, but you're making the problem. The clouds don't think it's a problem. The weather's perfectly happy being cloudy. We generate our problems by defining them into existence, and the problem is that we define them into existence, not that the conditions are there. And the conditions aren't actually what we think they are anyway, even as we're defining them, because what we think is happening is what's actually happening completely transcends in every way what we think is happening. We don't understand. You can't understand what events actually consist of and what's going on.
We're sort of talking about maybe the practice of admitting to yourself that there are no problems, and then kind of using that as a method to get at the, I don't know, kind of transcendental quality of the stuff of life. Seems useful. That's the thing I've been kind of trying to get at, and when I get at that, seems like immediately things can kind of dissipate and fine. But yeah, seems like. Also, it seems that when I talk to other people that seem to have a problem or something, I'll try to give them advice like, you can just not have that problem, and they'll kind of go, why not? At the same time, with myself, I'll think, I can just not have this problem, but then I still go back to the thing of, no, it's a problem.
Yeah.
So it's just all very funny.
Yeah. To do that powerfully, if you do it from the point of view of assertion, it's not as strong. But if you do it from a point of view of seeing the way in which it's not a problem, because the way in which you're understanding the problem is not comprehensive. So, since you don't know what's actually happening, your assessment of it is going to be inaccurate. And it's not that it is or isn't a problem, it's that what's happening is vastly more than what you understand of it, so you're not competent to assess whether it's a problem or not.
Framework itself is actually flawed.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. And when you see that, it's powerful, because then you get very clearly that, wow, I really can't know what's going on in this situation. It's too much. It's bigger than me. There's no way for me to get a handle on it. There's too many factors and what all. And in that context, you're not saying it's not a problem, but you're saying, I can't know if it's a problem. I can't even know what's happening, so how can I know if it's a problem? And so you're in a condition of unknowing, which is very different from being in a condition of a problem. You are in a condition of no problem, but you are in a condition of a problem. You're in a condition of question mark. And question mark is a lot more flexible and open and less problematic than a problem per se.
Kind of like you suspend judgment and just kind of saying, is that? Just kind of of course, suspending the judgment.
Yeah, but again, to do that powerfully, you have to have a basis for suspending judgment, and the most powerful basis is that you can't know what's actually happening, and the only obviously authoritative way to have a judgment is if you knew what the conditions were that you were assessing. And when you see for a fact that you can't know that, because there are and will be aspects that you can't know or don't know, which could completely reverse it in terms of what your approach to it is, then that completely undermines the authority of your assessment. Acknowledging the actuality of not knowing is very powerful. It's useful. It's not a disempowerment. On the contrary, it's a big empowerment, because our bravado of claiming to know things is very disempowering. It really castrates us and makes us small and little and powerless, and it basically stuck in a life of suffering and pain and so on and so forth. Whereas not knowing is actually an entrance into actuality, even if you don't go through the door, but nonetheless it's a much bigger, broader, less locked-in condition than the condition of thinking you know, when of course you don't. Because it turns out, of course, things aren't knowable, whether you know that or not. That's actually the case. That whole mode just isn't viable. The mode of approaching these things as if you knew what they were just is not actually viable. It doesn't work. It can't be done.
But I can know through identity.
Yeah.
Being,
sure.
Which I am.
Yeah. You know through being it in the way that it is.
Yeah.
Because it is as your experience, and you are your experience, so you are it as being your experience. and it is your experience. So same thing, collapses. But when talking about this verbally, we end up using a lot of sort of negatives. It's not this, it's not that. You can't know it. You're this, you're that. But that's very misleading, because what this is actually entirely a positivity. It's not this and not that and not the other. It is what it is, and it is that in spades, and it's the only thing that is. So it's not just a positivity, it's the positivity. And so, but you can't get that in terms of a verbal approach, because the only way to begin to try to accurately approach it, or semi-accurately approach it verbally, it tends to be negative. Say, well, it's not, it's kind of this, but it's not, it's kind of this, but it's not. And so there's a lot of it's not. Yeah, which gives it a feeling tone of negativity, which is entirely the opposite. This is the life force itself. This is radiance itself. This is the actual being of the universe itself. This is the Big Bang itself. I mean, this is as positive as it gets. And that's the powerful way to access this, not through a chain of negativities. Just by being with presence, being with this radiance, being with the positivity. Just be with the life force. Feel your own aliveness, and bang. I mean, it becomes immediately self-evident. Well, I can't say anything about it, but it's so actual. I mean, it's undeniable, and it's, and right there you're in this astounding, open-ended positivity that is actual, and it is what all the fuss is about. There is caffeinated chai. There's a guy down on the street corner dealing speed. Wonderful, eh? And with this is the positivity that it is unendingly exciting, stimulating, beautiful, informing, vitalizing, just involving. Boredom is an impossibility in the face of this actuality. It's just because the present moment is always wow. It's always in a continual state of amazing, wow. Without let up. it's not only the most powerful way to be with this, it's also the most fun way.
Just thinking about the sun, it's just fusion, a unification, what the thriving that comes out of all that.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's thriving because of all that energy.
Yeah. It's a perpetual motion machine. Should we take another break?
Sure.
Yeah.
Start to fag out,
We'll be back God knows when.
huh?
Okay, we're live.
Should we look at the cost?
Huh?
Did you go and look at the
I
cost?
did.
They drove somewhere. I don't know where.
Are they still not marked?
No, they're not marked.
So, given the indeterminacy,
Yes.
it would have to be logic that would determine that this is has always been and always will be.
No. Logic. Logic does not apply, because for logic to apply, there you have to know that logic applies, which you can't. But there is no always. Always does not refer to time. Always refers to the only way. Always. So yeah, this always is this because that is what this always is. It's not. It has no duration. But for duration you need time, and when you're looking for time, it doesn't resolve itself as a simple condition. If you're looking at a question, could this become something other than it is? You can't say. But it's not important for our purposes. The main thing is not to speculate on what this could or could not become. The main thing is to see the actuality of your condition, and orient to it rather than orienting to a misunderstanding of your condition, which is problematic in various ways.
Well, I'm not saying that it is anyway, but I hear that I've heard you say that it is a certain way, and I'm just saying that there's no way you can know that.
Okay.
Given the indeterminacy of it, it's just here it is, and
Okay, that's fine. So I'm a bullshitter.
All this time.
all this time.
It's certain that it's uncertain.
No.
And not that. And neither.
The point is to discover liberation, and liberation is not dependent upon what this is. Liberation is merely dependent upon orienting to what it happens to be. And whether or not that changes at some point or another is not an issue as far as liberation is concerned.
The difference was what this is, not what this is, what it happens to be.
Well, what it is and what it happens to be are one and the same, of course.
Exactly. I mean,
That's not what he said, though.
he did. It's not what this happens to be. It's not what this is. It's what it happens to be.
And what I mean by that is, if this became some other way, that's irrespective of the technique of orienting to it for liberation. Realization consists of discovering what this is, what you are. That's all. And you needn't worry about what that happens to be. Even if that changed.
I mean,
Huh?
we can't know that.
Can't know which.
What we happen to be.
Right.
I mean, we can never know that.
Well, yes and no. You can't define it, but you can know it by being it.
just what we find
Yeah.
as being.
Yeah.
As,
Yeah.
well, I mean, it is said that you can't say when it started, so that would be synonymous with it ending. I mean, I think that's what the logic was. Or is it just how you find...
That's not important. I mean, more precisely, if you want to get technical, it has no beginning and no end, not in the sense of extended time, in the sense of there are no demarcations in the instant. The instant has no beginning and no ending. So beginning, it is beginningless and it is endless right now, right here, intrinsically, rather than as an extension of time. It's not that it had no beginning, it has no beginning. There's no point where it comes into being, there's no point where it goes out of being, because it's not like that. The present moment doesn't have a point where it becomes the present moment, or a place where it becomes the present moment. None of that applies, it's not like that at all. So, it's beginningless in the sense that beginnings, the whole quality of a beginning just doesn't apply to it. And the same with endless. Again, not as a function of history, but as a function of intrinsically what is the case.
Well, not to introduce speculation very much, but that's how we find ourselves now. But there was a time in which we did not know this to be as it is, as we find it now. In other words, there was not the consciousness or the awareness happening through a body-mind, which enabled it to be as it is known now, in a beginningless, endless state. But at some point it did start that way.
Well, you say that, you speculate that, but that's an abstraction.
So is saying that, so is saying the opposite of that. You know, that would be an abstraction too.
What's that?
That that there never was a time in which we didn't know this.
Well, anything you say is, by virtue of your saying, is an abstraction, and it's unimportant. It's unimportant.
I thought it was I thought that was a integral part of liberation.
The reason why reality is liberating is because it's intrinsically transcendent. If you're asking whether it can it sometimes stop being transcendent, who knows? But that's irrelevant. That's pie in the sky. That's like how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. You know, it is as it is, and the way that it is beyond time. Doesn't include time, as we know. It doesn't include space, as we know. It includes that, but it transcends it. So those notions aren't particularly relevant.
Not that it doesn't become transcendent. That our ability to perceive this, the reality appearing.
What about reality appearing? Reality doesn't appear to us, reality appears to itself.
To itself. And is known to itself through how we know it to be. And how we know it to be is it seems clearer to say through a body-mind than to say not through the body-mind.
That's not accurate now.
It seems more accurate to say we know this through a body-mind than to say the body-mind doesn't even come into the picture.
It's neither. It's neither. That's. Look, your body appears in consciousness. When you dream, your body appears in consciousness, and the dream seems to be appearing perhaps through a body, mind in the dream. You wake up and you see that wasn't the case. You know, experience does not occur because of bodies. Bodies occur because of experience.
I find.
And if you want to hold a different point of view, that's absolutely fine.
It's hard to know that as a certainty. It seems to be the case, but
the reason is you're trying to know something specific as a certainty, and there's nothing specific you can know as a certainty. There are no specifics. I mean, even the body, you're asserting a body is define exactly what you mean by body. You can't. So, I mean, every term of this thing falls apart under its own lack of definition.
it's not the names of it. It's the.
I'm not talking about a name.
Yeah.
What's a body? So you're saying experience depends upon body mind. What is a body? Exactly what is a body? Is the sun a body?
The way experience is known through the sense perceptions.
What does through mean?
By them, with them.
Sense perceptions appear in experience. In what sense is there any throughness or byness going on?
Well, I mean, you don't only need that. I know that that's just a portion of the way in which experience happens.
Is that a way in which it happens, or is that just an aspect, an arbitrarily differentiated aspect of it happening?
It's arbitrary. It's an arbitrary way of looking at experience.
Yeah. I'm not saying that vision doesn't happen. I'm not saying that bodies don't happen. I'm saying that what we designate by these terms is not what we think we designate, and we're designating something that we can't get a handle on. And so as such, we're not talking about what we think we're talking about. I'm trying to put that very simply. In other words, vision, we can't know what vision is, so to talk about what it is we're already out of our depth. We can't know what we're calling a body actually is. So to talk about what it can or can't do, or what it needed for or not needed for, is baseless, essentially. If we knew what bodies were, if we knew what anything was and how it actually worked, then we would have our foot in the door to actually consider how essential or necessary it is for various functionings or whatever. But we can't. We usually think we do because we don't analyze our terms. We used to throw out this word like body as if it meant something specific, and we all knew what that was. But a body is an abstraction that is very sloppily referred to arbitrary groupings of characteristics of dynamic, unstable, infinite characteristics that appear in experience that don't have any particular coherence. So you can't find a body as a thing, as an undeniable thing. Oh yeah, that's a body. Get anyone else to agree, yeah, you're right, that's a body. If we don't look too closely, we can say, yeah, I know what I mean by my body, and I can assume you know what you mean. But that kind of not looking very closely is, by its very nature, is how we get into the conundrum.
Well, you know what it is when it's dead.
Do you? What do you mean you know what it is when it's dead?
How can you say that? When you're dead, you can say that. Maybe.
Another body. I mean,
No, you don't know what another body is when it's dead. You don't know what it is when it's alive.
I know. We're talking about liberation.
Yeah.
And I was aware of experience happening and not knowing what that is.
Right.
And
Good.
and not defining what it is that perceives experience. So, okay, given we've got a lot of indeterminacy going on.
Yes.
But if you include other things that are going on.
Like what other things that you're going to include?
Well,
Is it other? So we have experience, and then there's other things. What other things? What are the other relationship of these other things to this experience that's going on?
it's sort of fleshing out a little bit more of how we find ourselves to be, or how we find this happening.
Really, you don't find this happening as a whole? Does it require additional fleshing out? I mean, it's not like in the instant that everything is just there, just here, bang.
That's one way. That's one way.
Is it one way?
I find that happens. Okay, that happens. Now,
Does that ever not happen?
in addition to that, there is experiencing this from perspectives.
Is that an addition? Perspective exists within experience. No? I mean, I could say, well, there's experience, and then there's my hand. You know, but my hand appears within experience, so saying, and then there's my hand, sounds as if I'm adding something to it, but I'm not actually. And so thought, I can say there's experience, and then there's thinking. But thinking is just an arbitrary designation of a very small portion of experience, so I'm not actually adding anything. Perspectives, likewise, however they occur, are, let's say, mental events or whatever, that are occurring within experience, so they already come with. When you say there's experience, you're already including that, so you're not actually adding something else that needs separate consideration.
Well, these things that we find happening, like thinking and emotions and perspectives and paradigms,
Sure.
it's all more thinking and identity.
Right.
Now, identity just appears, just like everything else just appears,
Right.
and yet there's a lot of subtle implications to that.
Right.
That hook one into
A worldview,
thinking,
let's say.
yeah, thinking of in terms of a kind of separateness.
Right. Well, that's what we've been talking about today.
Yes.
That's the whole issue. And I was saying that whole conundrum is generated essentially through, typically unconsciously, but through orienting towards holding this to be various ways. And the solution to that is to be with what is actually present, which is intrinsically impossible to hold various ways, because it is not definable sufficiently. It's not findable sufficiently. So in other words, if all of that's going on, the points of view and the thinking and the emotion and the thought and the identifying and the generating points of view, if all that's going on, then what I'm saying is that's an instance of misidentifying what this actually is as consisting of happening in certain ways which are partial. And being partial, they're not complete, hence not accurate, hence not true, hence not real. And so all the conundrums of all of this identifying is just a fallout from that one mistake. And the solution to that mistake is to see that what you're identifying isn't actually like that, but then of course the identifying falls away as something that you give any credence to, and it just becomes a hypothesis, an abstraction.
it's a certain point, I don't know what it was you said, but it's like, this you see it clearly and then it goes away and then you see it clearly
Sure.
and at some point it happens all the time.
Sure.
But it seems like it takes a kind of vigilance to not fall into the abstractions.
It may seem like that sometimes. Yeah, sure.
Now, is that because this is not seen clearly enough that one would fall into thinking that all these things are
No,
real?
it's because of our. It's not that this isn't seen clearly enough. It's our attraction to and our addiction to these points of view. We go back to them accurately. It's not that reality is dropping away. It's we are leaving it by our going to these points of view and definition.
I see them just merging up. I just feel it coming right up.
Right, but they're coming up because you are going to them. They come up in the same way that your absorption into a movie comes up when you go into a movie theater.
I'm not interested in them anymore.
Right.
But they come up.
If you weren't interested, then when they came up, you wouldn't even see them.
Talking about movies now.
How do you leave reality?
Then I guess it's a way of seeing interest. I mean, just knowing interest, or it's subliminal or unconscious.
If you weren't interested when they came up, you wouldn't care. It wouldn't even matter. It'd be like, okay, there I am. There's my mind, my insanity. I'm a crazy person. It's like, okay, yeah, what's new? Nothing new there. But if it's like, oh no, I'm getting sucked in, I have to get out of this and struggle with it. So then there's a mattering, and that mattering is basically an individual. You make it matter. It doesn't tell you it matters. In one sense, that's obviously not literally true. Something you're doing on purpose, but essentially you give it importance by your investment in it. And again, obviously not deliberately or intentionally, but maybe through habit or whatever.
You guys were having an exchange on Wednesday at the end about the juiciness of storylines, like the interest. And I've seen that myself, but I've also seen that my interest in more elaborate storylines has decreased. But I have, like the other thing you talked about, a heavy-handed narration all the time.
Sure.
And that I also can see is happening in the context of, space or, but my focus is on it.
Right, sure.
And it actually feels, I think of it as being tedious to be focused on that, but I guess it has some attraction. I mean, based on what you're saying.
Yeah, if you find yourself going to it, it may feel like it's forcing itself on you, but in actuality, in a profound sense, you're going to it. And basically, as ignorance falls away, that attraction falls away. You get to a point where you're just not that interested. It's not that necessarily you get disinterested in it before it stops happening. It's not like it stops happening and there you are all of a sudden free of your interest. On the contrary, it's your interest that feeds it.
Yeah.
And essentially makes it happen. It's like throwing gasoline on a fire. Whereas as your interest falls off, that the investment in the narration falls off, and essentially the narration dies back, or maybe stops, but it certainly will die back too. And you can't contrive these things. It's not like something you can set out to do. The strongest way you can do it, you can deal with that, is what I recommend, which is noticing, which is not by trying to solve that problem, but on the contrary, ignoring it entirely, ignoring struggling with it, ignoring even trying not to do it. Just when it happens, let it happen, and what the fuck. Just go to the positivity, go to noticing whenever you can, go to direct presence whenever you can, which is intrinsically is the opposite of investment in the story, and will intrinsically ultimately seduce your interest away from interest in these narrations, and your interest will be in this openness. But you can't contrive that. You know, you can't do it because you want to do it. You have to. It's like a spontaneous maturing. You have to get to a point where the momentum of your karma is doing that.
Right.
But if you're even experimenting with this stuff, that obviously you're in that sort of a mode one way to one degree of depth or another.
Yeah. I mean, I also find that there's sort of through experience finding the lack of satisfaction.
Yeah.
All that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Especially, you do noticing, you discover, you discover this fullness, this richness of openness, and then you go to this other stuff and it's small and it's little and the payoffs are really paltry.
Right.
I mean, they're petty. Like the soap operas, you just don't get, at the end of the day, you're just not getting much of a bang for your buck. You're getting all torqued up and invested in following all this stuff, and then, when the payoffs happen, it's like, was that worth it?
Lots of eye rolling going on.
Yeah.
Payoffs are not even what they were expected to be.
Yeah.
And also the narration, I also starting to see how the narration is inaccurate and can't be accurate.
Yeah. But all of that is energized most powerfully in contrast with noticing. So even noticing doesn't directly deal with an obsession with that kind of narration. It undermines it by countering it. In other words, it doesn't solve the problem, but it replaces it as an object of interest. And it is interesting, and it is nourishing, and it is fun, and you are getting bang for your buck out of that, really demonstrably, even if it's subtler than the sort of the more coarse, overt sort of stuff you get in soap opera, You get jerked around, and you get emotionality, and you get to get righteous indignation, and all these various other things, which is kind of it's a very coarse kind of, oh yeah, something's really happening. And just in noticing, it's more subtle, but it's luscious and rich and big, and as you develop a kind of a sophisticated enough palate to be able to drink from that and get how delicious it is, it just weans you away. I mean, ultimately.
Yeah.
But, typically it just looks like a transition. And it can look like a very prolonged transition. So, sort of moving back and forth and still hanging out with your interpretations and all that for long, I mean, it can be years and years, who knows, whatever. Is very typical. I mean, everyone's unique. There's no law. One person it might take 30 seconds, another person it might take 30 years.
Right.
30 lifetimes, whatever.
We could come up with a mechanism.
But if you're even in looking at this stuff, then you're well in it.
Yeah.
So it's the good news. Did we cover your?
Yeah, I think I had a moment of insanity.
Well. Welcome to the club.
It's like I resonate with what you say, and it's like the field happens, and it's there, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, but what about this? What about that? What about
Yeah, it's exactly insanity, but what it consists of is this is what we started talking about today. It's orienting towards a defined way of holding this to be, versus orienting towards the actual presence, which is undefinable.
Well, it's if you think you're going to get rid of these questions by getting answers to them, just eliminate them, as opposed to just staying with this and knowing that when they do arise, you may or may not get an answer, but it doesn't matter. I mean,
this is not about answers. This is about letting go of the questions.
Yeah.
This is not about solutions. It's about having the problems become irrelevant. And it is a different mode, because if you're for example, say, a problem-solving mentality, this is very alien to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like
it's a whole different thing. The problems turn out to be kind of dream problems that weren't actually important at all. They seem important when you're orienting to them as if they were, But when you stop doing that, then they become irrelevant through unimportance, not through a solution.
Okay, right. Importance arises.
Yeah.
It's why we do. I mean, it's probably a large part why we do things. Otherwise, you just sit in your chair all day.
Not necessarily. You'll do things. Well, A, what's wrong with that? And B, you will do things. Sooner or later, you'll get hungry. You need to go to the bathroom. You'll get bored. The phone will ring. Something will happen. You know. I mean, try doing nothing. Try it. It's not. It's not really sustainable. You know, and it's not about what you do. It's about discovering reality. You know, and then you'll do what reality wants you to do, and reality is not wrong. Reality cannot be wrong. You know, I mean, in other words, if you take consensus human idea of what humans are supposed to be, and intrinsic reality's idea of what humans are supposed to be, who you gonna call? You know.
I think there's like a thing where, for some stupid reason, we get afraid of the belief system that we've been clinging to falling away, and now all of a sudden that's gone. Oh no, but it's always been gone. So
sure.
It seems
It's a conundrum, you know. It can be frightening, it can be insecurity provoking, and all that, because we're used to orienting towards our belief system, and we have a subconscious idea that we're getting something from that we're getting some security or some safety from doing that. In actuality, that's not true. All we get from it is pain and suffering, and no actual security whatsoever. In fact, you get much more security from orienting to reality, even though you have to make the transition to really get that. You know, the dicey time is when you're in between. When you're moving from one to the other, that's when all the problems occur. When you're in reality, there's no problems whatsoever. And when you're in your delusion, there's problems, but you don't even know they're problems because you just think it's normalcy, so that's not an issue. It's when you're in between, it's when you're transitioning, that's when the shit hits the fan. Because you don't get it either way, you know. You can't stand, you're rejecting your old normal way of doing things because you see it's insane, and this new way of doing things looks equally insane. And so you're like, well, God, where am I? What am I going to do? This is shit. I'm going completely nuts here. And that can be a rocky transition.
It's kind of between worldviews.
Yeah.
It's kind of true too, because when you're in that space, you are completely nuts.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like there's some kind of trust or something like that that comes in.
Yeah, absolutely, it does come in, because again, reality is powerful.
And somehow, even though you don't know it, you know it.
Yeah, of course, because you do. Because we always have been in reality, we always know reality. You know, this delusion, this ignorance is basically like a temporary insanity. I mean, temporary from, 3 months of age until, for most people, until death. But still, in all, ultimately, it's a temporary insanity which is imposed in the context of a fundamental reality, which we are and which we know most intimately. So it is familiar. It is, we already are doing it, and we already even know we're doing it. So the whole thing is very strange.
That's right.
Sorry, we're cooperating.
Do you know what it's telling you what it's telling you?
Okay, I got another one.
All right.
Oh, good.
Bring it on.
Okay, so given this,
Mm-hmm.
given this, I have heard that liberation is something that you know. I mean, it's a knowing.
Yes.
I feel that there's still something more. There's still that needs a little bit more discrimination.
My recommendation to you is that feeling comes from subtly, perhaps, departing from this into a subtle way of interpreting this. So that's a symptom of still orienting towards interpretation rather than orienting towards this. And orienting towards this, the fact of liberation becomes clearly apparent. And there are no other questions, because this is itself a big question mark, and so many questions melt into the great question. They don't have individual legs to stand on.
Okay, so it's like not being out there enough. It's like holding back somehow.
Yeah, in a way. Well, even as we extricate ourselves from relating to our experience interpretively, in other words, as we settle more and more into the actuality of our experience, there may be subtler ways, or perhaps lesser ways, in which we are still orienting towards interpretation subtly. Which is why typically the process of coming to realization can seem to take time, can seem to be a process, and can seem to be drawn out. Because as we extricate ourselves from an interpretive way of orienting to experience, it doesn't just happen like a light switch off and on, let's say, most typically. There's a kind of a seeing and a going back, and a seeing and going back, and in the going back, maybe you don't go back as fully or as hard. You may go back more subtly or to a more subtle layer of interpretation, but it still is the same thing. Because, relating to interpreting versus relating to actuality is like being a little bit pregnant. There's a little bit doesn't matter. If you're relating to interpreting, it's 100%, even if it's subtle and slight and not particularly full blown. Let's say.
So you really mean it?
Well, yeah. That I can say, yeah. I really mean it.
So there must be like layers and layers of interpretation going on.
Yeah, typically there can be. Yeah, sure.
And it's like, I think this discrimination thing is important. Being very discriminating about what's going on, what's happening.
Yeah, but discrimination is only important. The only actual discrimination that matters is discriminating between fantasy and actuality. Discriminating among fantasies is unimportant entirely.
Well, fantasy is what you mean by interpretation.
Yeah. Yeah. So interpreting within interpretations, interpreting and discriminating one interpretation from another is completely irrelevant.
Right.
The discrimination that matters is discriminating any interpretation versus actuality.
That it's happening or not.
Yeah. And actuality is very, very easy. The basis for that discrimination is very easy, because the symptoms of actuality are that you cannot say what it is. And yet it is present, actual, real, full-blown, multidimensional, in your face, etc., etc. So anything that you can think or say to any degree whatsoever, something about it, is a sure sign that it's an interpretation, a fantasy, so on and so forth. Whereas actuality, you literally can't say anything whatsoever about it. And as soon as you start to, you spun off into interpretations. It's really binary. There's no shades of gray in there. Actuality, you absolutely cannot get to the bottom of what anything is. Anything, even vaguely, even slightly. So it's very clear when it's there. Anything that seems to be something that you can say something about, or think something about, or argue something about, it's a sure sign that it is
exists in the realm of interpretation, fantasy. It may be an interpretation of actuality, but it's collapsing actuality, which is indeterminate, down to a determinate version of it, an aspect. And that aspect may be arguably findable in actuality. Like I could say, oh, you're female and your hair is such and such a color and you're such and such a tall height and blah, blah, blah. All that is relatively true, and I can argue, yeah, I can find that in actuality. I can go out here and measure and I find that. That's fine as far as it goes, but every one of those parameters is an approximation, and you are not an approximation. The actuality of you is exactly what it is, which completely transcends any approximation. I can't say what your height is. Your height can't be measured. It's unmeasurable. It's literally unmeasurable. It can't be measured. And so any value someone comes up with for your height is an approximation. I can't say what color your hair is. It's unmeasurable. It's uncollapsible. You can't collapse it down to a single quantity. It can't be done. It absolutely cannot be done. It's a physical impossibility. So as soon as I say what color your hair is, even if it's arguably kind of like that, it's an approximation. It's not the actual thing, and so on and so forth. So even if you're dealing with something which is very concrete and apparent, any specific that you assert is true about it is actually an approximation, hence an interpretation, hence inaccurate, to the degree that it doesn't comprehensively include the aspects that are present that deviate from the approximation, right? Is that clear? And so
Crystal.
okay, it must be quitting time.
Well, that's true, but then I think, okay, wow, we landed this machine on Mars.
Right.
I mean, my God, you know, we can't be clear about everything, and yet
we landed the machine on Mars, but we don't know what landing is, we don't know what Mars is, we don't know what a machine is. Yeah, and we did it, yeah. And we don't know what we is, and we don't know what doing is.
Really view it. I mean,
I'm not saying, that's a perfect example. I'm not saying that's not true as far as it goes, but you can't actually say what any of the terms of that statement actually is. What is Mars? Exactly what is Mars?
Okay, you don't have to go that far to come to an example that is much simpler to see. A table. You look at the table.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, there wasn't a table. There was a tree, supposedly, right? In events, this, in its constant changeability, manifested itself from a tree to this. And the steps that it took to get there isn't something that had to be thought about. It was something that was done, that happened. Done not by an agent, so to speak, but experienced itself this way, in other words.
Sure. And you can't say exactly what way that is comprehensively.
No, of course. I'm just saying Mars, going to Mars isn't, you don't even have to go that far. Go to something you've seen happen. A recipe.
Yeah. But anything you look at, that same thing applies to. Anything you look at, you can't pin down exactly what it is or what's going on with it. It just can't be done. Even you can say a lot of true things about it, but they are not comprehensive. It's that simple.
But the point of that is that we can't say that about ourselves.
You can't say that about anything. Yeah, ourselves, anything. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, just take a simple thing, a concept of a point. Okay, if you try to say a point, you have to say it's relative to something. Well, we're infinity. This is infinity. This is boundless. So where's that point? You can't say what it is because you have to say it's relative to something else, and if something else isn't there, it's just something you made up. It's a framework you came up with.
But that doesn't mean the point doesn't exist.
No.
I mean,
The framework you imputed.
But it's not a point.
But it's not.
You can't find a point.
Can't find it. If you look for it, you can't find it because you just keep
And the same thing with ourselves. We can't find it.
Anything whatsoever. And nothing whatsoever can be found. We found Mars, and that statement's true as far as it goes, except that we didn't find anything because we don't know what we is, we don't know what find is, and we don't know what Mars is.
And we knew where it was all along.
Yeah, and it didn't go anywhere. So. What I'm arguing against is oversimplification, because oversimplification throws the baby out with the bathwater. Oversimplification cuts us off from the astounding multidimensionality that's actually happening, and turns this open-ended hyperspatial, inconceivability into a mundane, mechanical, limited, system that can piss you off.
That's good. I like that.
Well, let's get it down to the point of this thing.
It's almost like a war going on, because you have this vastness that you can't have a handle on,
right.
And then suddenly this controlling mechanism that wants to have a handle
sure.
on things
sure.
comes right in and
sure.
says, yes, but I know this,
sure.
and this.
Sure.
Within that.
Sure, but it's within that.
Takes and
sure.
then starts taking center stage.
Well, it may want to stay. It tries to.
It tries to. Well, it does.
Try taking center stage in infinity. Yeah, sure. That's a good nice description. But it doesn't. The one doesn't stop the other. Okay. All of that mechanism takes place in this context of openness and doesn't stop the openness. So even experientially, even when, say, you're obsessed about definitions and you're really involved with this and you're getting torqued up about something, whatever, who knows, all of that is happening. That's a small system happening in an experiential vastness that is also happening, and you are that as well. You are there. It is real. It's actual, and it is. When I say vast, it's vast. It's really vast. It's vaster than vast.
Vaster than vast.
Bigger than big. Big to the power of big to infinity.
Still reaching.
So your center stage gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. It doesn't even need to not happen to be minuscule and meaningless.
It hides this big thing.
It doesn't. It claims to. It would like to.
Okay, wait. It's the thing that appears to be hiding itself is an experience. So it's not hiding anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's concurrent, you could say.
Good.
It's concurrent, but it's not like it's not there, but what you're aware of, it has the ability to hide the vastness.
It doesn't hide it. You go to it until it looms so large.
I'm it,
yeah.
Who knows what's going on,
sure.
but there's this amazing ability to
okay, it may hide it, but does not actually eliminate it.
Oh no.
The background is always available.
It's always there.
And right, but as you work with all this stuff, you will notice that over a period of time, you develop more and more of a facility to remember, more and more of a facility to have a sense of that background, even when you're sucked into this stuff, and that spontaneously develops over time, which is what we're talking about. Because the solution to the obsessions is the context. It's that simple. And simply contacting, being with the context over a period of time, the context dominates. The context wins in the long run. It's a sure thing. Because the context is actual and the obsessions are partial. And so wherever you happen to be in that process, it may seem like the obsessions have the upper hand, but in actuality they don't have a shot. It's like the 99%, they don't have a shot. They're squashed. They're shit out of luck. 1% has all the guns, all the money, all the military, all the politics, all the media.
You never see that here. People turn around. It's like being in Biscayne Bay.
Are they in wetsuits?
It's got to be wearing wetsuits.
Yeah, they're really good. They're never going to fall, so they don't need them.
It's an abstraction.
It sure is, but it's lovely.
It's a distraction.
hope you don't mean it when you say it depends on memory. If that's the case, I'm not fine.
No, it doesn't depend on memory. Did I say it depends on
Well,
memory?
you said, yeah, something like that.
You get better at remembering.
Oh, well, I was using her term.
Inherent memory is a.
I was saying
Her.
I'm
Doesn't apply to
But you're in this process, and so gradually you're moving towards that, and you will develop more and more of a facility to have that button. Right? I mean, it probably happens more now than it did 10 years ago.
Oh yeah, no, I see it happening.
Yeah, well then that's it. You're just in the midst of a process, but it's an intermediate position rather than a position of more finality. The roughest place to be is in this transition because you don't get your cake and eat it. You can't have the cake and you can't eat it, so you're kind of screwed.
Yeah.
When you're lost in ignorance, you at least think that matters, and you get to really be in that juiciness and suffer and be pissed off and have the horror of your life, right? And when you're in liberation, you get that, but when you're in between the two, you don't really get either, and it's just really piss poor. It's annoying.
You're pretty sure that
Well, that's of course the plus.
You can relate to
but you
that.
can
Totally.
that transition
It's worse.
won't last longer than your lifetime.
Probably, if you notice you're in it, you're probably in it pretty thick, which means you're coming out of it. If you even know it's happening, you're probably
Won't
well
last
through
longer
it.
than your lifetime.
Well, that's always, yeah.
That's reassuring, John.
Yeah. We don't even know that for sure.
Yeah, and what's a lifetime?
Yeah.
Yeah, buddy. No, that was great. She's taking the other side. That's right. Coming over to our team. Yeah.
Like I said, this
Welcome
just,
to
it
Mars.
just
Just to show that only your husband and I could switch sides.
But so is that, and that's a bunch of
Because he knows personally, he's been there.
What am I going to do?
Eat the pink pill. M.O. That's a good word, Oh.
Well, it's about quitting time.
I'm sure if anyone has a few extra minutes to help Lily put this place back together again, it would be appreciated, I don't doubt. And I've had fun this afternoon. I hope you did too.
Thank you.
Yeah,